Daniel Hayes had lived in Chicago his whole life, and the city had left its mark on him. Long nights working in a drafty garage, calloused hands blackened by oil, and a mind constantly calculating how to stretch every dollar. This was his reality. His wife had passed away years ago, leaving him to raise his young daughter, Mia, on his own. Every wrench he turned and every car he repaired wasn't just about survival. It was about giving her a better chance in life. The garage wasn't fancy. It had flickering lights, rusty tools, and a heater that barely worked in the winter. But it was his pride, the one place where his skill and determination gave him purpose. He had built a reputation for never giving up on a machine, no matter how hopeless it looked, and that stubbornness was the only thing that kept food on the table. One Friday afternoon, when the sunlight was slipping between Chicago's towering buildings, Daniel thought the day would end like any other. He was tightening the bolts on a pickup truck when the sound of a powerful engine echoed outside. He glanced up, wiping sweat and grease from his forehead, just in time to see a sleek black limousine pull up in front of the garage. The car's shiny paint looked out of place against the worn-down brick building. The door opened slowly, and a woman in a tailored suit stepped out, her presence commanding attention. Victoria Lane, one of the city's most successful CEOs, carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. She looked around the garage with thinly veiled disdain before her gaze settled on Daniel. Her smirk was sharp, almost cutting. Daniel felt it before she even spoke. She glanced at his oil-stained hands, his work boots, and the ragged overalls he wore, and it was clear she had already judged him. "You're Hayes?" she asked, her voice cool and distant, as if the very idea of speaking to a small-town mechanic in a shabby garage was beneath her. Daniel nodded silently, setting his wrench aside. "I was told you might have the persistence to handle something others couldn't," she continued, "but looking around," she gestured at the grease-stained floor and cluttered workbenches, "I'm not convinced." Her words carried no anger, just a cold certainty that he wasn't worth her time. Daniel clenched his jaw, but he refused to let her dismiss him so easily. Victoria explained her problem with an air of impatience, her heels clicking against the concrete floor as she paced. Her limousine wasn't just a car, it was a custom-built luxury vehicle designed by a European automaker. Somewhere in its intricate systems, a fault had developed, one that even the city's top mechanics had failed to diagnose. "If you can't fix it, don't waste my time," she said flatly, crossing her arms. Daniel studied her face as she spoke, noticing the sharp intelligence in her eyes, but also the doubt. He understood that look. He had seen it in customers before. They thought he was just another grease-covered worker scraping by, someone who didn't belong in the world of the wealthy or powerful. But Daniel had built his life on proving people wrong, one repair at a time. This was no different, except the stakes were higher than usual. Inside, Daniel's heart was racing. This wasn't just about a car. It was about pride, about showing his daughter that he could rise above people's judgments. Mia often told him that he had a gift, a way of seeing machines differently, almost like he could hear what they were trying to say. He thought about her as he faced the CEO. "I'll take a look," he said calmly, refusing to let nerves show in his voice. Victoria raised an eyebrow, her smirk deepening, as if she was amused by his quiet confidence. "You have until the end of the day," she replied. "I'll know soon enough whether your reputation is anything more than stubborn talk." With that, she stepped back, her arms folded, watching him like a hawk observing prey. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken tension. Daniel opened the limousine's hood and immediately saw the complexity before him. Sleek lines of engineering, advanced components, and a maze of electronics stared back. It was no ordinary engine. This was a machine meant for the elite, not the average mechanic. Most would have been intimidated, and maybe he was too, but he couldn't afford to show it. Slowly, methodically, he began his inspection. He traced the wiring, checked the battery, examined the fuel system, and tested the ignition. Each step drew him deeper into the problem. And with each passing moment, he felt Victoria's gaze burning into his back. He could almost hear her thoughts. He'll fail, just like the others. That doubt pressed on him like a weight, but he used it as fuel. He had failed plenty of times in life, but never when it came to giving up on something or someone that mattered. The air inside the garage grew heavy as the hours stretched. The sounds of Chicago traffic outside faded, replaced by the ticking of Daniel's tools and the occasional sigh from Victoria. Sweat dripped down his temples, streaking through the grease on his skin, but he didn't care. He blocked out everything but the machine in front of him. With every bolt tightened and every wire examined, he reminded himself of why he was doing this. Not for her approval, not even for the paycheck, though he desperately needed it, but for Mia. His daughter's belief in him was unshakable, and he couldn't stand the thought of letting her down. He remembered her words that morning as he kissed her forehead before school. "You always figure things out, Dad. You never quit." That simple trust gave him the strength to keep going, no matter how impossible the task looked. By the time Daniel straightened up from under the hood, his hands were sore and his back ached, but his mind was sharp. He had found clues, subtle misfires, irregular connections that others must have overlooked. He wasn't ready to make a move yet, but he could sense the heart of the problem, waiting for him to uncover it. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and glanced at Victoria. She was still standing there. Watching silently, her smirk softened into something unreadable. Maybe it was doubt, maybe curiosity, but it didn't matter. For Daniel, this was no longer about convincing her. It was about proving to himself, to his daughter, and maybe even to the world, that genius wasn't found in suits or skyscrapers. Sometimes it lived in grease-stained hands, in a small garage, in the heart of a single dad who refused to give up. Daniel leaned closer into the engine bay, blocking out the sound of Victoria's heels tapping impatiently against the concrete. Every sigh from her was like a reminder that she doubted him, but Daniel had learned long ago that rushing only led to mistakes. He traced wires carefully, running his fingertips along their paths as though he could feel where the problem hid. To an untrained eye, the limousine's engine was flawless. Polished metal, perfectly aligned belts, cutting-edge components. But Daniel knew machines lied. They could appear flawless, yet hide fractures beneath the surface. His daughter, Mia, sat quietly in the corner of the garage, swinging her legs on a stool. She was used to long hours spent watching her father fight with engines, but today felt different to her. The silence, the way the CEO watched, the stakes. She sensed this wasn't just another repair. Mia's soft voice broke through his concentration. "Dad, you always find what others miss." Her words were small, but they carried a weight that pierced through the haze of exhaustion. Daniel paused for a moment, looking at her and smiling faintly before returning to the wires. That single reminder rekindled the fire in his chest. He had been dismissed his entire life by wealthier mechanics, by business owners who refused to hire him, by customers who thought skill only came with brand names. But to Mia, he was nothing less than brilliant. That was enough. He focused harder, carefully testing voltage levels, tracing each circuit like a detective following evidence. Victoria watched with narrowed eyes, not hiding her impatience, but also not interrupting. She wanted to see if the so-called persistent garage rat, as some had called him, had anything real to show. The hours dragged on, yet Daniel never hurried. He was deliberate, patient, and unshaken by Victoria's shifting expressions. Sweat beaded across his forehead as he leaned deeper into the engine, his hands steady despite the tension. He found no burnt coils, no corroded battery cells, no loose hoses. It was maddeningly perfect, at least on the surface. Then he caught it. A faint irregularity in the circuit's continuity, so subtle it could have been missed 100 times over. His eyes sharpened. There it was, the flaw others had overlooked. A wire buried deep in the engine panel had been installed incorrectly, causing... intermittent failures that no scanner or quick test would detect. His pulse quickened. This wasn't luck. This was what he lived for, the moment a hidden truth revealed itself to him, as if the machine itself whispered its secret. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. One wrong adjustment could fry the entire system, and Victoria would walk out convinced of his incompetence. But Daniel wasn't guessing. He knew. His fingers worked with precision as he carefully rewired the circuit, each motion deliberate, like a surgeon repairing a damaged artery. He adjusted a stubborn fuse, realigned the connector, and tightened the socket until it clicked into place. The air in the garage seemed to still. Mia leaned forward on her stool, her eyes wide with hope. Victoria crossed her arms tightly, but there was the faintest flicker of curiosity in her sharp gaze. Daniel stepped back, his chest rising and falling with the quiet thrill of certainty. This was it, the moment when persistence met preparation, when a man with nothing to lose showed the world what he was truly capable of. He wiped his hands on a rag, slid into the driver's seat, and placed the key in the ignition. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Daniel twisted the key. Instantly, the limousine roared to life with a deep, smooth growl that echoed through the garage like a declaration of victory. The engine purred flawlessly, not a single stutter or hiccup, as if it had never been broken at all. Mia gasped, clapping her hands together in excitement, her face lighting up with pride. "You did it, Dad," she cried, her voice carrying more joy than 1,000 praises from strangers. For Daniel, that single exclamation was worth more than any paycheck. He turned off the engine and stepped out slowly, his gaze drifting toward Victoria. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a look of stunned silence, her sharp eyes wide as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. Victoria blinked, her composure momentarily slipping. She had walked in expecting failure, expecting another so-called mechanic to waste her time with excuses. But the reality in front of her was undeniable. Daniel Hayes had not only diagnosed the flaw no one else could, but he had fixed it in one try. She tried to mask her surprise, straightening her shoulders and smoothing her expression, but Daniel caught the faint hesitation in her movements. For the first time, she looked unsettled. "That shouldn't have been possible," she muttered, almost to herself. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His pride came not from humiliating her, but from proving, to himself, to Mia, and maybe to the world, that his talent was real. He picked up his rag, wiping the grease from his fingers, and simply said, "Sometimes it's not about expensive tools. It's about listening to the machine." Mia jumped down from her stool and ran to her father. Hugging him tightly around the waist, Daniel ruffled her hair gently, his heart swelling at her laughter. Across the garage, Victoria remained silent, her mind clearly racing. She was a woman used to control, to being the smartest in the room, to never being surprised. Yet here she was, standing in a run-down garage, outwitted by a single dad with grease-stained hands. She studied him with new eyes, and for the first time, the hint of her smirk had disappeared completely. But something else lingered, something sharper, almost calculating. Daniel didn't notice. To him, the victory was simple. He had done what no one else could, and he had done it with his daughter's belief keeping him steady. For a man who had spent years underestimated, this moment was everything. Victoria froze in the middle of the garage, the smug expression she had carried since stepping out of her limousine completely gone. The sound of the engine roaring perfectly behind them was undeniable proof that Daniel had succeeded where every so-called expert had failed. For a long moment, she could only stare at him, her sharp eyes narrowing not in anger, but in disbelief. She had built her empire by surrounding herself with the best, and yet this struggling single dad in a grease-stained jacket had just exposed a blind spot in her world. Daniel didn't bask in her silence. He simply pulled a rag from his back pocket and wiped his hands, as if what he had done was no more special than tightening a loose bolt. His calmness made the scene even more striking, and Victoria found herself stepping closer without realizing it. Daniel finally looked up at her, his expression steady, his eyes carrying the quiet strength of a man who had endured too much to be intimidated anymore. "Sometimes," he said simply, "it takes someone who refuses to quit." His words weren't meant to humiliate her, but they struck with surprising force. Victoria, who was accustomed to polished pitches and boardroom strategies, found herself oddly shaken by the humility in his tone. She opened her mouth, ready to fire back a clever retort, but nothing came. Instead, her chest tightened with an unexpected sensation: respect. She hadn't planned for this, but there it was, undeniable. Behind them, Daniel's daughter ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist, her small frame pressed against him, her joy shining brighter than the fluorescent lights flickering above the garage. "You did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. Daniel rested a hand on her head, allowing himself a smile that was rare and hard-earned. Victoria watched the exchange, and something softened in her. In her own climb to success, she had left family behind, replacing connection with competition. Seeing the bond between father and daughter stirred something in her, a memory of what she had lost in pursuit of ambition. She had come to this garage expecting failure, but instead she had stumbled upon a reminder of humanity. Victoria cleared her throat, regaining some of her composure. "You realize what this means?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Daniel raised a brow but said nothing, waiting. "That flaw you spotted, it wasn't just in this car. The same wiring issue exists in hundreds of vehicles across my fleet. If you could see what teams of engineers overlooked, then I need you. Your insight could save us millions, maybe more." She held out a sleek folder, one she had brought along just in case. It contained a preliminary contract, an offer she had never expected to use tonight. "I want to hire you," she continued, "not as a simple mechanic, but as a partner." Daniel blinked, his hands tightening slightly on the rag he still held. The word partner wasn't one he had heard often, certainly not from someone like her. His first instinct was disbelief. Offers like this weren't made to men like him, the ones who fixed cars under leaking roofs and struggled to stretch every paycheck. But then he glanced down at his daughter, her wide eyes brimming with hope, and something inside him shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this was his moment. Still, his cautious nature pressed him to respond carefully. "Why me?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. "You've got all the money and experts in the world. Why come to me now?" Victoria met his gaze, and for once there was no smirk, no armor of superiority. "Because genius doesn't always come dressed in a suit," she said honestly. "It comes from those who see what others don't. Tonight, you proved that." Her admission hung in the air, echoing in the quiet garage. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, her words sinking in. For years he had questioned his worth, working tirelessly without recognition, his sacrifices unnoticed by the world. Now, in this unexpected turn, validation came not through praise, but through an opportunity that could alter the course of his and his daughter's lives forever. The weight of choice pressed on him. Accepting her offer meant stepping into a world he knew nothing about: contracts, negotiations, and high-stakes deals. It also meant leaving behind the safety of the small garage that, despite its flaws, had been his anchor for years. But then his daughter tugged at his sleeve, her voice small, yet steady. "Dad, you always tell me to never doubt myself. Maybe it's time you don't doubt yourself either." Her words struck deeper than anything Victoria could have said. Daniel knelt down, hugging her close, his heart swelling with emotion. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe he was capable of more than survival. He rose to his feet, his decision clear. "All right," he said at last, his voice carrying both resolve and humility. "I'll take the chance. But understand this. I don't care about wealth or titles. I care about building something real, something my daughter can be proud of." Victoria extended her hand, and Daniel clasped it firmly, sealing the beginning of an unlikely partnership. In that handshake, two very different worlds collided: the polished empire of a CEO and the gritty resilience of a mechanic. But together they formed something neither could have achieved alone. As the limousine idled smoothly nearby, the three of them stood in the garage that had once symbolized Daniel's struggles. Now it symbolized possibility. Victoria's respect was genuine, Daniel's dignity restored, and his daughter's future brighter than ever. For years, engines had been his escape, his way of keeping the world turning one repair at a time. But this night, in front of a once doubting CEO and his hopeful daughter, Daniel realized his skill was never just about fixing machines. It was about changing lives. And at last, it had changed his own.